there are two separate Trump clips that we're going to play for you right now. The first one is of him predictably making it about, you guessed it, the 2020 election.
Probably ever. We were
President
energy
Trump,
independent, and he blew it.
We're just learning that U.S. officials are looking at a potential amphibious landing now in Odessa, Ukraine. Again, a month ago or 3 weeks ago, all the so-called experts were saying that, you know, Putin was probably going to just be content with staying in those separatist regions. But I think given what's unfolded, sadly, with a lot of weakness in the United States, they just decided to go for it. I mean, it looks like they're going for it. And where does that leave NATO, the NATO alliance?
I think you're exactly right. I think that's what happened. He was going to be satisfied with a peace, and now he sees the weakness and the incompetence and the stupidity of this administration. And as an American, I'm angry about it, and I'm saddened by it. And it all happened because of a rigged election. This would have never happened. And that includes inflation, and that includes millions of people pouring in on a monthly basis, far more than 3 million people. And they're coming from 129 different countries. We have no idea what's happening, and they're destroying our country.
President Trump, we actually have, just hold on. I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Should be called interrupting Ingram. Like, she just can't stop.
Well, I mean, it's just breaking news. And let's just play the second clip before we dive in, because she talked about the amphibious attack. Trump clearly wasn't listening to her. She follows up again about it, I guess with some more information or whatever. And here's his response.
Monitor this, continue to monitor his statements. We'll go back to President Trump for a quick reaction. We had a kind of a really pathetic display from the Ukrainian President Zelensky earlier today, President Trump, where he, in Russian, he didn't like to speak Russian, but in Russian, he was essentially imploring Vladimir Putin not to invade his country. And now we basically have the Ukrainian ambassador to the United Nations looking like a defeated man. Your final reaction?
Well, I think the whole thing, again, would have never happened. It shouldn't happen. And it's a very sad thing. But you know what's also very dangerous is you told me about the amphibious attack by Americans. You shouldn't be saying that, because you and everybody else shouldn't know about it. They should do that secretly, not be doing that through the great Laura Ingraham. They should be doing that secretly. Nobody should know that, Laura.
Can you pause it for a second? Okay, so we're about to get the correction from Laura Ingraham. But how does this guy's brain work that he went on this whole tangent about the election, and then it just triggered for him, oh, she said something about the amphibious attack before. So it wasn't new information that she provided. He just thought about it again and was like, why did she say that? That's supposed to be secret. But keep playing it, Bradley.
That was the Russian. Those are the Russian amphibious landing.
No, I thought you said that. I thought you said that we were sending people in.
No, I did not. No. That would be news. That would be news.
All, and you know what? Hey, that's all we need. That'll be next. Okay. Now we ought to protect our own borders. You know, we ought to get to the southern border and start protecting the southern border. But it's a very terrible situation. It's a situation that.
You know, when I talked about the crocodiles being in the moat at the southern border, I was the first with the amphibious attack.
This is why it's so incoherent, the right-wing response to this, which is like, we're going to hit Biden for being too weak, and then say the last thing we need is him to send troops. Like, really, Donald Trump's only, like you said, his only critique is that it's not him in the White House.
They think that, like, just by like sheer bravado that a president has, they're going to they would have scared Putin into not taking action and doing something. That's basically what it's all about. Trump thumped his chest just hard enough and in the right spot that made Putin go, oh, I don't want to mess with him. But Biden, he didn't do that. So that's why Putin went ahead and invaded Ukraine. And that's why we're here. So Biden didn't, he didn't have enough bravado. That's what it's all about. Because you're right. They're talking out of both sides of their mouth. We have to be strong, but we also don't want to send troops in. They're not exactly making that argument from an anti-war peace
No.
perspective either. They're coming from a pure nationalist America first. How is it going to affect our economy type situation? I mean, that's still what you're seeing.
Yeah,
the rights,
and I should correct myself. It's the alligators that are the amphibians, not the crocodiles. Sorry, them biology or whatever, not in the back of my brain at this point. I mean, no one seems to be talking about this except I saw Democracy Now! Did a whole episode on it. These are two major nuclear powers. I believe Russia has the largest nuclear buildup in the world. There is the idea that Trump could be president right now, and I'm not, lauding Biden's response as absolutely perfect, but the idea that we could have that kind of situation with Trump being president and him just doing something entirely unpredictable with a nuclear power, that's terrifying to me. And he could very much be president again if he chooses to run in 2024. Sorry,
right.
Brandon, go on. I cut you off.
Oh no, I didn't actually say anything, but I can if you'd like.
Always.
But no, I mean, I think that like stuff like this, stuff like the Republicans pretending when the Democratic Party is in power that they have some sort of unique stance on geopolitical aggression than the Democrats is largely for show. I mean, there are some key differences between, I guess, the Republican and the Democratic Party, but their stance on, their ultimate stance on NATO and American imperialism and American expansion and the role of America in the world is largely the same, despite, Trump complaining about NATO taking American money and all that other shit. It's like we know that generally speaking, he wasn't the dove presidency that some people kind of thought he might be, in contrast to other Republicans, which again, the distinguished, I think the sort of that false divide between him and other Republicans is also being proven to not be true as well. So really, I think, I just go back to my initial point, which is it's sad that like really, regardless of whether we had a Republican, maybe non-Trump in charge or a Democrat, there was never really an option for like, okay, us using any kind of authority or power we have as a country to enact any real peaceful agenda to de-escalate. It was always just going to be, various forms of escalation, maybe at various speeds, but escalation is the only tool in our toolkit.
We had Sleepy right in Binder. Sorry, go on.
Can I ask you? I want to, because I could speak on the media aspect of this and the right wing aspect of this, but in terms of like the actual foreign policy and international relations, I didn't mention anything about Russia, Ukraine, because this isn't my area of expertise, and I think that's when you step back and let people who know more talk. So I want a serious question here. I see a lot of people bring up how NATO expansion is part of agitating this. But what I struggle to see in this specific instance, and I totally get the critiques of NATO, but what I struggle to see in this situation is you have a country here, in the case of Ukraine, who has been asking to become part of NATO for a decade and a half now, and NATO has turned them down. So my struggle here is how this is in a response to American aggression via NATO or anything like that. Like, this is clearly, Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO in any shape or form anytime soon.
No, they were never going to be part of NATO for any shape or form. Excuse me if it sounds like I was saying that this is a response to NATO or American aggression. My initial point was that like America or NATO have no actual interest in de-escalating any situation, despite what is coming, across in our media. We have interest in selling weapons. We have interest in selling weapons to NATO allies. We have interest in NATO still being around and expanding, generally speaking. We have interest in selling weapons to countries bordering Russia, generally speaking, and broadly speaking, as part of our neoconservative agenda, we have an interest in America being the only superpower. I think people are very excited, not you, Matt, by the prospect of there actually being a war going on where America is not the explicit aggressor, though. That I think really somehow excites people who are like on this role of like, well, I have taken the position that I understand that American exceptionalism is not true, but I still want to position America as like this exceptional country in a way that's distinct and good and righteous, as reference to our Constitution or as reference to our infinite potential. I think my largest feeling about it is that I wish America was a country that was interested in de-escalating situations as opposed to generally escalating them.
Right.
Yeah, and honestly, I would just add to that. I keep going backwards, but the emphasis on NATO right now is not the number one thing that should be emphasized. The point is that it set up a series of preconditions for a fascist or for an imperialist like Putin to rise to power. And now he's really just using it as an excuse. And if there was diplomacy that could have been had, then maybe we could have been they could have talked about not allowing Ukraine into NATO if he was operating in good faith. But it seems clear based on his actions that he was not.
Yeah, like this is the point, like kind of to Brandon saying, like, it'd be interested if we had we're interested in de-escalation. This is a point from Tom, who is private on Twitter, so I won't put his ad out there, but he asked this question: assuming this is a lie and invasion is what Putin wanted all along and that Western intelligence knew this, why didn't NATO just guarantee Ukraine wouldn't join in exchange for something? Would invasion have destroyed Putin's domestic legitimacy, right? Like, if they had been more de-escalatory, and we agree about the NATO stuff, but if you just said that, right, then this invasion would have even looked worse now. And I think in the coming weeks, like, that's going to be a problem for Putin. I'm hearing, like, Carl Bayer's doing good coverage of this.
Yes.
Like,
check out his Substack.
He's hearing from people in Poland and stuff, hearing from people in Russia saying they don't want this to be happening, right? So I don't think this is going to be popular. And I think that's, like, where you need to attack.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say this real quick, but go ahead.
I also sort of don't understand that point either, though. Like, the idea of why not just assure Russia that Ukraine will never be part of NATO? Like, I don't get why that's, like, if Ukraine is asking to be part of NATO, again, criticism of NATO aside, we're in the reality that it exists, and this is what we have. Ukraine wants to join NATO. Why does Russia get to call the shots of whether or not a sovereign nation gets to join NATO if that's what they want to do? I mean, I don't get why we need to give them that assurance. Like, if the roles were reversed and it was the U.S., and this has happened, I'm sure, if it was the U.S. saying that some, like, South American nation or some Central American nation couldn't join some allied group so they could strengthen their sovereign state, we would be in the wrong there. We wouldn't say, oh, they should have assured the U.S. that, this Central America or South American country wouldn't join that group. Like, we would be in the wrong. Like, who are we?
Well, we make the determination really who is allowed in, and the Binder froze.
I think Binder froze, but I mean, I think to his
he's
point,
back. I think, right? No, you let him go.
Hello?
Okay.
We lost you, Binder.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just saying, like, I don't get why we have to get, like, I get NATO makes the choice, but why give him that assurance? It doesn't make any sense to me.
The point was, if you know that he's going to invade, then it's going to make that look worse. And you also know that Ukraine's not going to be in NATO, then you just accept the reality. And then particularly if you're on top of Putin, as Western intelligence appeared to have been about this invasion, then you make the invasion look worse by just accepting the reality. Unless you think, like, why not? If Ukrainians want to be in it, then I guess why shouldn't they just be in it? I mean, that's not my position.
Well, they wanted to. We keep losing Binder.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys cut out.
Cyber
Sorry
attack
about
on Binder.
that.
Cyber.
Yeah,
you got too close to the truth about Russia, and they just shut you down. No, I mean, I think to your point, man, I think it's sort of my larger answer. What I was going to say before too. It's like, yeah, we do engage in those sorts of things, and people also jump through hoops, especially internally, to justify why it's okay for America to do that stuff abroad. Which is not to say it makes it okay for Russia to do it abroad, or China, or any others who are proud to do it abroad. It's just that the impulse in our culture is that to provide it leads to an impulse in our culture that to provide any context for why something happened, because also we saw it with 9/11 as well, the third 9/11, the one that happened in 2001, not the one that happened in, as we saw about off air, Chile, and then the one in 93, to provide any context for why terrorists blew up the World Trade Center was seen as to justify that action. And I think that, we can talk about, and we have to talk about, the context under which both, like, the excuses that they're making, what's been going on in Europe for the past 30 years, this idea of NATO, the idea of, like, America as a universal good and on the right side of history. It all has to be interrogated. But I think a lot of people, to, like, Matt's point, just immediately hear that as, like, okay, you're making excuses for why war is okay, or why invasion is okay, or why aggression is okay, when in reality that's just like, a framework from which like Americans justify their own aggression overseas. Like the first, if you can come up with a reason, either it's like to protect your national security, like Russia's arguing or whatever, or any other thing, that it just makes it okay to invade. But I don't believe that, obviously. That's those are the beliefs of the people who are trying to ascribe them onto us.